35-year-old Elena Martinez's drought-stricken farm sat at the epicenter of a classified governmental water rights investigation, a revelation only discovered after her impulsive rescue of a stranded environmental official during the region's worst dust storm in half a century brought presidential attention to their forgotten agricultural community, exposed a sophisticated water theft operation running beneath their parched fields for decades, and transformed a struggling single mother facing imminent foreclosure into a national symbol of how ordinary acts of compassion can uncover corruption that threatens America's food security and restore hope to rural communities abandoned by policymakers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The August dust storm had transformed Copper Valley into an apocalyptic landscape of swirling soil and zero visibility. Elena Martinez, a third-generation farmer at 35, stood at her kitchen window, watching the howling brown cloud with mounting anxiety. The foreclosure notice on her table, its bold red final warning header impossible to ignore, confirmed what she'd dreaded for months. Without a miracle, the Martinez family would lose the farm that had been their home for over 60 years. Could hit 3 feet of topsoil loss by morning, Elena muttered, setting aside the bank's warning as her daughter Sophie entered the kitchen. At 12, Sophie was already showing the same determination and resilience that had helped Elena keep the farm running for 3 years since her husband's death in a tractor accident. The girls' science fair project on sustainable water usage had won regional recognition last month. Small comfort as their actual irrigation system faltered under the strain of the 3-year drought. "Mom, the storm warning just got upgraded," Sophie said, holding up her tablet with its cracked screen, another small sacrifice in the endless list of things they couldn't afford to replace. "They're saying it might be the worst since the Dust Bowl, visibility down to 0 on the highway." She pushed her glasses up her nose, a gesture that made her look momentarily older than her years. "Should we check on the emergency generators if power goes out again?" Elena nodded, her weathered face showing both bone-deep exhaustion and the stubborn determination that had kept her working this land long after neighboring farms had been sold to corporate agricultural operations. 5 generations of Martinez women had endured on this soil, from the original homestead established by her great-great-grandmother after emigrating from Mexico through droughts, floods, and economic downturns. None, however, had faced the perfect storm of challenges now threatening to sweep away their legacy. Climate change had brought increasingly unpredictable weather patterns to this once reliable growing region. Global market pressures had driven crop prices to unsustainable lows, and the mounting medical bills from Sophie's asthma treatments, exacerbated by the increasingly dusty conditions, had drained what little financial reserve remained after Elena's husband died without adequate life insurance. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. The Martinez farm might survive nature's worst, only to be claimed by the bank 6 weeks from today. Their last hope rested on a federal agricultural sustainability grant application she'd spent weeks perfecting, submitted just before the deadline last month. The program prioritized women-owned family farms, implementing water conservation techniques. Exactly what Elena had been pioneering out of desperate necessity. "I'll check the generator," Elena said, moving toward the utility room. Her shoulders ached from yesterday's failed attempt to repair the irrigation pump. A task her husband would have completed in hours had taken her all day and still wasn't properly fixed. Another item on the endless list of things she was learning to do alone. As Sophie filled water containers, a habit from previous power outages, a strange sound penetrated the howling wind. 3 long blasts of a car horn, then 3 short. The universal signal for help. "Someone's out on the county road," Elena Zed already reaching for her heavy work coat. In this visibility, they could drive right into the irrigation ditch. Sophie frowned, worry evident in her eyes. "Mom, you can't go out in this. The weather alert says to shelter in place, which means there's no emergency services coming," Elena replied firmly, already pulling on her boots. "Get the tractor ready. The ATV won't handle these conditions." Sophie knew better than to argue further. The Martinez family code, passed down through generations, was simple. You never turned your back on someone in need, especially during the harsh weather events that could claim lives within hours. Whatever financial troubles they faced, whatever challenges loomed, some principles remained unshakable. 10 minutes later, mother and daughter were inching their way down their long driveway on the farm's aging John Deere tractor. Its headlights barely penetrated the wall of swirling dust. The temperature had climbed to 103 degrees, with the relentless wind making it feel even more oppressive. Eleanor was grateful for the tractor's cab, a luxury her grandmother never had, though its air conditioning had failed years ago. "When this is over," Sophie shouted over the engine's roar, attempting to lighten the mood, "remind me again why we didn't move to Seattle when Dad's brother offered us a place." Elena managed a small smile at her daughter's attempt at humor. Sophie's uncle had indeed suggested they relocate after Manuel's death, convinced the farm was a losing proposition. Elena had refused, unwilling to surrender the land that had defined her family for generations. Now, with foreclosure looming, she sometimes wondered if that had been the right decision for Sophie's future. They followed the county road that bordered their property, visibility sometimes reduced to mere feet ahead. Elena slowed at each driveway and intersection, methodically searching for whoever had signaled for help. After nearly 20 minutes, Sophie spotted a government-issued white SUV half buried in the roadside ditch, hazard lights blinking weakly through the dust. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena approached cautiously, the vehicle's official markings suggesting someone from the county or state level, unusual visitors in their remote agricultural community. Through the driver's window, she could see a woman in her 40s, professional attire, now disheveled, attempting to make a call on a phone that clearly had no service. "You need to come with us right now," Elena called after the woman rolled down her window, immediately triggering a coughing fit as dust filled the vehicle. "This storm's just getting started, and you're in a dangerous position here. That ditch can fill up fast if the wind shifts the topsoil." The woman hesitated, glancing at a laptop and several official-looking folders on the passenger seat. She had the polished appearance of someone from the city, auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun now coming loose, sharp features, and an alertness in her eyes despite her obvious distress from the dust. "I can't leave my vehicle and documents," she replied, her voice strained but authoritative. "I'm on official business for the Department of Interior. Diana Keller, Senior Water Resources Analyst." Elena was unimpressed by the title. "Your choice is simple, Ms. Keller. Bring what you can carry and come with us, or stay with your documents and possibly die beside them. We're about 10 minutes from losing our trail back to the farm, and these conditions are deteriorating by the minute." Something in Elena's direct tone must have conveyed the severity of the situation. The analyst nodded quickly, gathering her laptop, several folders, and a small duffel bag. Elena noticed she wore a government ID badge clipped to her blazer and kept one hand protectively on a particular blue folder as Elena helped her climb onto the tractor. "Thank you for coming out in this," Diana said, settling behind Sophie in the cab's limited space. "My GPS routed me through here as a shortcut to the regional office. I obviously misjudged the weather warnings." "Elena Martinez," she replied simply, "and my daughter Sophie. Our farm's about a mile back. You're lucky Sophie heard your horn. Cell service disappeared about 2 hours ago when the main tower went down." As they slowly made their way back to the farmhouse, Elena couldn't help but wonder what would bring a senior water analyst from the Department of Interior to Copper Valley during the worst dust storm in decades. The community had been steadily declining for years, losing population as farming became increasingly untenable due to changing climate patterns and falling crop prices. The last government official to visit had been the bank's foreclosure assessor, 3 months ago, whose report had no doubt contributed to the final notice now sitting on Elena's kitchen table. "You're a long way from any regional office," Elena observed, as the tractor struggled through an especially heavy drift of soil. "Whatever it is you analyze." Diana's expression remained carefully neutral. "I evaluate water usage patterns and rights allocations in drought-affected agricultural zones. Sometimes my work takes me to unexpected places." Sophie shot her mother a questioning look from the driver's seat, but Eleanor just shrugged slightly. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, though something about the analyst's careful phrasing suggested there was more to her story than a wrong turn in bad weather. The Martinez farmhouse came into view, a modest 2-story structure that had been expanded by each generation since it was first built in 1935. Warm light spilled from the windows, where Eleanor had made sure to leave lamps on in case visibility dropped completely. The wind had sculpted the topsoil into surreal dunes around the property's outbuildings, giving the familiar landscape an alien quality. "It's not much," Eleanor said as they approached, "but it's shelter, and you're welcome to stay until the road's clear." Diana nodded gratefully, though Elena noticed her eyes scanning the property with unusual attentiveness, taking in the barn, the equipment shed, and the irrigation system beyond. It wasn't the casual observation of someone seeking shelter. It was an assessment. Once inside, Sophie turned on additional lights and adjusted the air filters, while Eleanor found clean clothes for their unexpected guest. A simple t-shirt and jeans that would be more comfortable than her dust-covered business attire. Diana excused herself to change, taking her blue folder and laptop with her to the bathroom, but leaving her duffel bag in the kitchen. "Water resources analyst?" Sophie whispered, once their guest was out of earshot. "During the worst dust storm in 50 years, do you think this has something to do with the grant application?" Elena shook her head. "Grant reviewers don't make site visits, especially not in these conditions. And those were federal government plates on her vehicle, not state water board. Something else brought her to Copper Valley." When Diana returned, color had begun to return to her face, though she still coughed occasionally as her lungs worked to clear the fine dust. Elena noticed she kept the blue folder tucked securely under her arm and had repositioned her government ID badge so it was more visible, though Elena couldn't make out the specific department details from across the room. "I can't thank you." "Enough," Diana said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "I seriously misjudged the situation out there." "Happens to city folks all the time," Elena replied without judgment. "Weather here doesn't give second chances. You said you were trying to reach the regional office? That's still a good 60 miles west, and this storm's supposed to last through tomorrow at least." Diana sipped from the water glass Sophie had provided, then seemed to make a decision. "Actually, Copper Valley was my destination. The regional office was where I planned to file my report afterward." She hesitated, studying Elena's face carefully. "How long has your family owned this land, Ms. Martinez?" The question caught Elena off guard. "Going on 6 generations now. My great-great-grandmother purchased the original 40 acres in 1921. My grandfather expanded to 80 in the 50s, and my parents added the west section in the 80s. She gestured vaguely toward the window, though nothing was visible, through the swirling dust. "Why do you ask?" Instead of answering directly, Diana reached for her blue folder, opening it carefully I should be clear about something. I'm not exactly a water resources analyst, at least not the kind that typically visits individual farms. She removed an identification card, sliding it across the table to Elena. The presidential seal was unmistakable, as was her title, Special Advisor, National Water Security Task Force, reporting directly to the executive office. I'm investigating a coordinated water rights manipulation and theft operation that we believe has been functioning in this watershed for over a decade. She continued as Elena stared at the identification. Your farm happens to be situated at a hydrologically significant position that's come up repeatedly in our investigation. Sophie had joined them at the table, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Our farm? That's impossible. We're barely keeping the irrigation system functional. If someone was stealing water here, we'd be the first to notice and the last to benefit. Diana nodded, understanding. We don't believe your family is involved. In fact, based on our preliminary investigation, the Martinez farm appears to be one of the only properties in this particular water district that isn't connected to the network we're tracking. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the howling wind outside. Connected how? And who exactly are we talking about? I can't share specifics of an ongoing investigation, Diana replied, but I can tell you that several properties surrounding yours have changed water rights allocations multiple times over the past 15 years, always between a select group of corporate entities that our forensic analysts have flagged as suspicious. The transaction patterns and timing suggest artificial water rights transfers designed to move allocation permits while appearing legitimate. She pulled out a watershed map from her folder, spreading it on the table. Red circles marked various properties surrounding the Martinez farm, which sat unmarked in the center. Your property is unique, she continued. It's maintained consistent water rights, despite substantial offers that were well above market value. According to our records, your late husband turned down an offer 3 years ago that was nearly triple what comparable land was selling for at the time. Elena remembered that offer, arriving suspiciously soon after Manuel's funeral. She had dismissed it without serious consideration, despite their financial struggles. Martinez land stays Martinez land. It was a principle Manuel had lived by, and one she wasn't prepared to abandon, even in grief. We always figured they wanted it for development, Elena said slowly, though nothing ever came of the surrounding properties they did buy. Some changed hands 3 or 4 times, but just sat empty or were leased back to the original farmers. Diana's expression confirmed she had noted the same pattern. Exactly, water rights that change ownership, but not usage patterns, are classic manipulation, especially when the ownership chains create circular patterns that eventually return to entities connected to the original purchaser. Sophie leaned forward, her scientific mind working through the implications. But why here? Copper Valley is literally drying up. If you wanted to manipulate water rights, wouldn't you target areas with more reliable water supplies? That's precisely why drought-stressed regions are attractive, Diana explained. Less regulatory scrutiny, fewer public resources for enforcement, and transactions that don't attract attention from urban-focused water agencies. Plus, the more desperate the community, the less likely anyone is to question sudden changes in ownership. She turned to Elena. Your farm occupies what our hydrological analysis indicates is a critical position. It effectively sits atop a key aquifer access point that would allow whoever controls it to potentially redirect underground water flows from multiple surrounding properties. The implications were starting to sink in for Elena. Are you saying someone wants our land not for its agricultural value, but because it's strategically positioned for water theft? Diana nodded grimly. That foreclosure notice isn't a coincidence, Ms. Martinez. The bank holding your mortgage was acquired 8 months ago by a holding company we've been tracking. The timing suggests they may be accelerating actions against properties that interfere with their operations. Elena felt anger rising through her initial shock. Someone had deliberately targeted their farm, leveraging her husband's death and the drought to force a foreclosure that had nothing to do with the land's actual agricultural value. She thought of the generations of Martinez women who had worked this soil, of Manuel, who had loved farming more than anything except his family, of the legacy she had fought to preserve for Sophie despite the mounting odds against them. "What exactly are you investigating?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. "What would make our land worth all this trouble?" Diana hesitated, clearly weighing how much she could reveal. The howling wind rattled the farmhouse windows, a reminder of the isolation that currently enclosed them. The storm had effectively cut Copper Valley off from the outside world, including whatever support systems the government advisor might normally rely on. "I'm not supposed to disclose this," she finally said, "but given the circumstances, you deserve to know." She pulled another document from her folder, a hydrogeological survey map with various markings that meant nothing to Elena. "Are you familiar with the term deep aquifer water rights?" Diana asked. Sophie answered before her mother could. "Underground water reserves that predate current usage laws. Most states have grandfathered access protocols based on historical claims rather than current property ownership." Diana nodded, looking impressed. "Exactly. This region sits above one of the largest untapped supplementary aquifers in the southwest. It's not just valuable. In a prolonged drought scenario, it's strategically critical for national food security." She pointed to specific formations on the map. "The network we're tracking isn't just manipulating surface water rights. They're quietly assembling land holdings over the aquifer access points before its existence becomes public knowledge." Elena stared at the map, suddenly seeing her struggling farm in an entirely new light. "And our property?" "Preliminary. Surveys suggest your land contains the most accessible entry point to the aquifer. Drilling anywhere else would be exponentially more difficult and expensive without access through your property." The three sat in silence as the implications settled over the kitchen. The old farmhouse creaked under the assault of the dust storm, a sound that had always represented security to Elena. They were inside, protected from the elements. Now she wondered what other threats had been surrounding them, invisible but no less dangerous than the storm outside. "So what happens now?" Sophie finally asked, seemingly unfazed by the revelation that their modest farm sat atop a water source potentially worth millions. "Foreclosure is 6 weeks away. Even if what you're saying is true, I don't see how it helps our situation." Diana closed her folder deliberately. "That depends on your family's willingness to work with us. I came here to propose a cooperation arrangement, though not quite under these circumstances." She gestured toward the window and the storm beyond. "The federal government can delay your foreclosure through various legal mechanisms while our investigation continues. In exchange, we'd need access to your property and your assistance with monitoring activities in the area." Elena considered the proposal, years of farmers' caution warring with their desperate financial situation. "And after your investigation, what happens to our farm then?" "I can't make guarantees," Diana admitted, "but documentation of deliberate predatory actions against your mortgage could provide grounds for legal remedy. At minimum, it would give you leverage for refinancing options that weren't previously available." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it offered something Elena had almost given up on. Time. Time for the grant application to be processed. Time for her to implement some of the water conservation measures she'd been researching. Time to find a way forward that didn't involve losing everything her family had built. "We'd need something," In writing, Elena said, practical as always. Some kind of protection in case this investigation gets shut down or reassigned. Diana nodded. I have authorization documents in my briefcase. They would need to be properly filed once the storm clears, but they're valid once signed. As she reached for her briefcase, a sudden sound outside caught their attention. The distinctive rumble of heavy engines, barely audible through the storm, but unmistakably approaching the farm. Elena moved to the window, straining to see through the swirling dust. We're not expecting anyone, and nobody would be out driving in this unless it was an emergency, Sophie finished, joining her mother. Elena turned to Diana, whose expression had shifted to alert concern. Any colleagues of yours I should know about? She shook her head slowly, reaching into her jacket and removing a small service pistol that Elena hadn't realized she was carrying. No, my presence here isn't known to local authorities, and backup isn't scheduled to establish contact until after the storm. The engine sound grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Through a momentary clearing in the dust, Elena glimpsed two dark SUVs, similar to Diana's but with no visible markings, parked at the far end of her driveway. Get away from the windows, Diana instructed, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of her training. Is there a basement or storm shelter? Root cellar, Elena replied, already moving toward the pantry. Access through the kitchen. Her grandfather had expanded it during the Cold War, and Elena had reinforced the door last year after a tornado warning. One of the few home improvements she'd managed before their financial situation deteriorated. As Sophie quickly gathered flashlights and emergency supplies, Elena saw Diana send a rapid text message before powering down her phone completely and removing its battery. Her actions confirmed what Elena already suspected. Whoever had followed her to the farm wasn't part of her official investigation. How did they find you in this storm? Sophie asked, voicing the question Elena was thinking. They must have been tracking me before I lost control of my vehicle, Diana replied grimly, which means they know exactly why I'm here. She turned to Elena, her expression deadly serious. Ms. Martinez, I believe the people approaching your home are connected to the network I'm investigating. They're not law enforcement, and they won't have your best interests in mind. Until this storm clears and I can contact my team, we should assume we're on our own. As if to punctuate her warning, a heavy knock sounded at the front door, too confident to be another stranded traveler seeking help, too forceful to be easily ignored. Elena Martinez looked at the government advisor and her daughter, processing how completely their situation had transformed in the span of an hour. The foreclosure notice seemed almost trivial now compared to the immediate threat outside. As Elena moved toward the root cellar door, she realized that her simple act of rescue during the worst dust storm in decades had unexpectedly connected her to something far larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. The stranger she'd pulled from certain disaster carried information that had apparently made her a target. And now her family farm, already hanging by a financial thread, had become the isolated battleground for what appeared to be a confrontation with far-reaching implications. All Elena had wanted was to save her family's legacy for her daughter. Now she found herself trying to save something far more immediate: their lives and the life of a presidential advisor who had brought both revelation and danger to her door on the wings of the summer storm. The knocking came again, louder this time, as Elena quietly secured the root cellar door behind them. The Martinez farm had kept its secrets for 5 generations. Now it would need to keep 3 people alive until the storm retreated and the truth could finally emerge from the dust storm's concealing embrace. Elena squinted upward, expecting to see the barrel of a weapon pointed at them. Instead, a familiar face appeared in the opening. Diana Keller, dust clinging to her hair and a fresh cut visible on her cheekbone, but very much alive. "Quickly!" she hissed, extending a hand to help them out. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they realize their perimeter guard isn't responding to radio checks." As Sophie helped Elena climb back into the maintenance chamber, she noticed something different about Diana. Her borrowed coat was now bulkier, and a second weapon was visible at her waist, presumably taken from one of the perimeter guards she had encountered. "Your inhaler," she said briskly, handing Elena a familiar medication. "And this." She passed Sophie a set of keys with a prominent key fob. Their transportation. 2 SUVs parked behind the equipment shed, engines running to keep the air conditioning working. Elena quickly used the inhaler, relief flooding through her as the medication opened her airways, even though she knew the effect would be temporary. "How many did you—" She left the question unfinished. 2 incapacitated non-fatally, Diana replied, with professional detachment. "I'm a government advisor, not an assassin, regardless of what they might have told you while I was gone." She checked her watch. "The storm is expected to begin clearing around 2200 hours. If we can secure transportation and reach the county road, we might be able to rendezvous with my backup team once they're able to mobilize." The plan made sense, but Elena hesitated. "We're talking about stealing vehicles from armed mercenaries in the middle of a dust storm, then somehow navigating to a rendezvous point while potentially being pursued, as opposed to waiting here to be found by their thermal imaging equipment and executed as witnesses," Diana countered. "I don't like the odds either, Ms. Martinez, but we've run out of alternatives." The matter-of-fact assessment was interrupted by a crackle of radio static from a device attached to Diana's belt, another acquisition from the perimeter guards. A voice came through, partially obscured by interference, but clear enough to understand. "All units, thermal scan showing 3. Heat signatures in the cistern's lower level. Converge and secure. Repeat, converge and secure." Diana's expression hardened. "Decision time is over. We move now, or we die here." The stark choice hung in the air for only a moment before Elena nodded. "Lead the way, Agent Keller." With renewed urgency, they prepared to step back into the dust storm that had brought them together and now represented their only hope of survival against forces determined to preserve secrets that had been buried beneath Martinez Farm for far too long. Stepping back into the dust storm was like diving into a sandblaster. The brief respite in the cistern had allowed their lungs a momentary reprieve, making the renewed assault of grit-filled air all the more shocking. Elena felt the dust dig into her eyes, despite the protective goggles Diana had recovered from. The farmhouse, along with the inhaler. Diana led them along the cistern's curved exterior wall, using the structure to shield them from the worst of the wind while providing cover from potential observers. The inhaler had eased Elena's breathing difficulties, allowing her to move with greater confidence despite the choking conditions. Sophie stayed close beside her mother, one hand at Elena's elbow, providing subtle support without being asked. A reversal of roles that stirred both pride and sorrow in Elena's heart. At 12, her daughter was demonstrating courage and maturity, well beyond her years, facing dangers no child should ever encounter. Diana moved with the careful precision of her training, balancing speed with stealth as she guided them away from the cistern. The stolen radio at her belt occasionally crackled with transmissions, providing valuable intelligence on their pursuers' movements. "Primary team entering lower level now," a voice reported through static. "Stand by for confirmation." "They've found our hiding place," Diana translated unnecessarily, her voice muffled by the dust mask she wore. "We have minutes at most before they realize we've left and organize a search pattern." The equipment shed where she had located the intruders' vehicles was roughly 200 yards from the cistern, a distance that would be trivial on a clear day, but represented a significant challenge under current conditions. Elena forced herself to focus on each step, drawing on the stubborn perseverance that had carried her through the aftermath of Manuel's death, when giving up would have been easier than facing each day alone. Visibility remained severely limited, rarely extending beyond 20 feet in any direction. The dust storm, that had initially seemed their greatest threat, had become their most valuable ally, concealing their movement while hampering their pursuers. Even thermal imaging would be of limited use with dust this thick and wind this strong. "How did you manage to get past their guards?" Sophie asked Diana as they pushed forward, genuine admiration in her voice despite their dire circumstances. "The storm provided cover," she replied simply. "They were watching for movement from the perimeter inward, not from the cistern outward. I approached from their blind side and used non-lethal takedown techniques. Presidential security training emphasizes neutralization over elimination whenever possible." Elena noted her deliberate emphasis on non-lethal and neutralization, a clear contrast to their pursuers' casual discussion of no witnesses. Whatever moral complexity might exist in this situation, the lines between right and wrong seemed increasingly clear. As they approached the equipment shed, a dark shape gradually emerged from the swirling brown. The metal building, used primarily for storing the farm's tractors and implements, was one of the newer structures on the property, built when Elena's operation had been more profitable. Now it sheltered 2 black SUVs, identical to the one Diana had been driving when she first encountered the storm. "Stay low and move to the side door," Diana instructed, indicating a smaller entrance on the building's southern wall. "I'll verify the vehicles are still viable for transport." Before they could follow her direction, the radio at her belt crackled again, this time with unmistakable urgency. "All units. Targets have evacuated the cistern. Tracks indicate movement toward the southeast quadrant. Deploy thermal and establish. Search pattern Alpha. Shoot on sight. Repeat, shoot on sight." The order eliminated any remaining doubt about their pursuers' intentions. Elena exchanged a grim look with Sophie as Diana accelerated their pace, abandoning stealth for speed. "Change of plan," she announced, steering them directly toward the main doors of the equipment shed. "No time for subtlety." The large sliding doors were partially open, allowing them to slip inside without fully exposing themselves. The interior was dark, but considerably less dusty than outside. The idling engines of 2 black SUVs maintained a temperature that felt frigid after the heat of the storm. The vehicle's headlights were off, but their running lights provided enough illumination to navigate the space. Elena recognized 2 inert forms, secured with plastic zip ties in the corner. The guards Diana had incapacitated. They were breathing, but unconscious, their weapons and communications equipment removed. The thoroughness of Diana's work reminded Elena that despite her professional demeanor, she was witnessing a highly trained government operative functioning in crisis conditions. "Sophie, you take the lead vehicle," Diana directed, tossing her 1 set of keys. "Your mother rides with you. I'll follow in the second SUV to provide cover if necessary." "Wouldn't it make more sense for you to lead?" Sophie questioned. "You know where we're going." "County Road 27 heading east," she replied efficiently. "It's the most direct route to where my backup team will be approaching from. But more importantly, if we encounter resistance, I need to be in the trailing position to engage while you get your mother to safety." The strategic thinking was sound, though Elena disliked being treated as a liability requiring protection. For most of her life, she had been the protector, the one who solved problems and ensured others' safety. Illness and circumstance had imposed limitations she resented but couldn't deny. "What about the farm?" she asked suddenly, the question surprising even herself. "All our equipment, the crops, The heritage seed vault? We can't just leave it. Just for now, Sophie cut in gently. Once Diana's team arrives, we can... A sharp crack from outside interrupted her. Not gunfire this time, but the distinctive sound of the cistern's exterior hatch being forced fully open. Their pursuers had already tracked them to the equipment shed. "Go now," Diana commanded, her service weapon drawn as she positioned herself between them and the potential threat. Sophie reacted instantly, helping Elena into the passenger seat of the lead SUV before sliding behind the wheel. The vehicle was already running, its air conditioning blasting cool air that felt almost painful against Elena's dust-coated skin. Through the windshield, she watched Diana back toward the second vehicle, her attention fixed on the partially open door through which they had entered moments earlier. The shed's main doors were partially blocked by equipment, requiring Sophie to maneuver carefully before they could exit. The engine's sound seemed thunderous in the tense silence, surely alerting anyone nearby to their presence. Elena held her breath, expecting gunfire at any moment. Instead, a different sound cut through the howling wind, the mechanical whine of the shed's side door being rolled open. A beam of light swept across the interior, followed immediately by a male voice, shouting, "Contact! Vehicles mobilizing!" Diana fired 2 precise shots that shattered the light source, plunging that section of the shed back into darkness. She dived into the second SUV as Sophie finally created enough clearance to maneuver their vehicle through the main doors. "Go, I'll cover." Diana's voice came through clearly, despite the chaos, the calm authority in her tone somehow more reassuring than any emotional urgency would have been. Sophie accelerated, the SUV's 4-wheel drive struggling momentarily before gaining traction in the loose soil. They burst from the equipment shed into the full fury of the dust storm. Visibility instantly reduced to the few yards illuminated by their headlights. Behind them, muzzle flashes briefly lit the darkness as shots were fired toward their retreating vehicles. The SUV's navigation system came to life as Sophie activated it, displaying their position on the Martinez property and the fastest route to County Road. 27. Elena watched the small blue dot that represented them moving steadily across the digital representation of her land. Land that had been in her family for generations. Land that now seemed to be slipping away from them in more ways than "They're following," Sophie reported tensely, eyes flicking between the windshield and the rear-view mirror where headlights had appeared, cutting through the dust perhaps 100 yards behind them. Both Diana and at least one of their vehicles. Elena twisted in her seat to look back, wincing at the strain the movement placed on her dust-irritated lungs. She could make out the distinctive pattern of Diana's SUV's headlights with another set of lights close behind it, too close. Diana was being pursued, and the distance was closing. A flash of light erupted from the trailing vehicle, followed by the crack of gunfire, carried faintly through the storm. Someone was shooting at Diana's SUV from the pursuing vehicle. "We have to help her," Elena insisted, instinct overriding caution. Sophie nodded grimly, already slowing their vehicle. "What do you suggest? We're not armed, and I'm not exactly trained for vehicular combat." Before Elena could respond, Diana's voice came through the SUV's communication system, apparently linked to both vehicles. "Maintain course to extraction point," she ordered, her voice steady despite the obvious danger she faced. "Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." As if to emphasize her point, more gunfire flashed from the pursuing vehicle. This time, Diana's SUV swerved sharply, executing a maneuver that momentarily confused her pursuer. Elena watched in astonishment as she deliberately steered into a deep furrow at high speed, using it to spin her vehicle 180 degrees while maintaining forward momentum. The result was that she was now facing her pursuer, both vehicles still in motion, but on a collision course. For a breathless moment, Elena thought she intended to ram them head-on. Instead, at the last possible second, Diana's SUV veered sharply to the side, forcing the pursuing vehicle to swerve to avoid impact. The pursuers' evasive action sent them into an uncontrolled slide on the loose soil. Their vehicle spun completely around before coming to rest at an awkward angle, temporarily disabled but not destroyed. Diana quickly righted her course, accelerating to catch up with Sophie and Elena. Her voice came through the communication system again, now with a hint of urgent satisfaction. "That buys us maybe 2 minutes. Push to maximum safe speed for conditions. We need distance now." Sophie complied, pressing the accelerator as much as she dared given the treacherous conditions. The SUV's powerful engine and four-wheel drive system performed admirably, maintaining traction where most vehicles would have faltered. Elena found herself grateful for the intruders' choice of transportation. Whatever their other failings, they had come prepared for the environment. The navigation system indicated they were approaching the property boundary that separated Martinez farm from the county road beyond. Elena felt a strange pang as they crossed this threshold. In 35 years, she had never fled her land under threat. Even during the worst crises, the flood of 2010, Manuel's death, the wildfire that had nearly reached their eastern fields last summer, she had stayed and faced whatever challenges arose. This forced departure felt like surrender, though her rational mind understood the necessity. County Road 27 was barely distinguishable from the surrounding landscape, dust having erased the usual visual markers of pavement edges and center lines. Only the relative flatness of the road surface and the occasional reflective post indicated they had reached their destination. "East," Diana directed as they paused at the junction. "My team will be approaching from that direction once the storm clears enough for vehicle deployment." Sophie turned the SUV as instructed, the wheels briefly losing traction before grabbing hold of the packed surface beneath. Diana's vehicle followed close behind, her headlights providing additional illumination that helped identify the road's path through the brown expanse. For several minutes, they traveled in tense silence. The only sounds the howling wind outside and the steady hum of the engine. The navigation system showed them making slow but consistent progress eastward, away from Martinez farm and toward the potential safety of government reinforcements. "How long until your backup could reasonably reach us?" Elena asked, breaking the silence. Diana's voice came through the communication system, slightly distorted by static. "The storm is forecast to begin clearing around 2200 hours. Assuming optimal conditions after that point, vehicle deployment could reach us by 2330 or midnight at the earliest." Elena checked the SUV's clock, 8:47 p.m., more than 3 hours until potential rescue, assuming the weather cooperated. 3 hours of running and hiding from pursuers who knew the area and had demonstrated both resources and determination. "We can't just drive in a straight line for 3 hours, Sophie observed, vocalizing Elena's own concern. "They'll catch up eventually, especially if they call in additional personnel." "Agreed," Diana replied. "We need a defensible position to wait out the storm, somewhere not obvious, but accessible by road." Elena considered their options, mentally reviewing the landscape along County Road 27. Most properties in this area were farmland similar to her own, with scattered homesteads that would provide little security against determined pursuers. But there was one exception. "The old Riverdale processing plant," she suggested, "about 8 miles east. It was a cotton gin originally, but the county converted it to an emergency command center about 10 years ago. Should be unoccupied during the storm, but secure." "Would it have communication equipment?" Diana asked, professional interest evident in her tone. "Basic radio for county operations," Elena confirmed. "Maybe a landline if it hasn't been disconnected. At minimum, it's concrete construction with limited access points and good visibility of the surrounding area." The suggestion met with Diana's approval, and they adjusted their course slightly to align with Elena's directions. The county facility wouldn't appear on standard navigation systems as anything other than an unmarked building, potentially giving them an advantage if their pursuers relied on GPS rather than local knowledge. As they continued eastward, the storm showed the first subtle signs of diminishing intensity. Dust still filled the air, but the wind had begun to slacken slightly, allowing visibility to extend beyond the immediate reach of their headlights. Elena took this as a positive omen, though she knew from decades of experience that dust storms in this region were unpredictable and often deceptive in their patterns. The medication had fully taken effect now, reducing her respiratory symptoms to a manageable background discomfort. The immediate crisis had passed, though Elena harbored no illusions about her condition. Without proper medical attention soon, the strain of their flight could trigger a more serious episode. She kept this concern to herself, unwilling to add to Sophie's already considerable burden. At 12, her daughter was demonstrating remarkable composure behind the wheel of the powerful vehicle. Another skill Elena had taught her early, recognizing that on an isolated farm, the ability to drive could someday be a matter of survival. That lesson was proving prophetic in ways she could never have anticipated. "How did you end up working water security for the presidential task force?" Elena asked Diana through the communication system, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from physical discomfort. Her response came after a brief pause, as though the personal question had surprised her. "I was a hydrologist with the Army Corps of Engineers before joining the task force," she explained, "specialized in drought mitigation and water security for military installations in arid environments. When a project I was leading intersected with national security concerns about climate-driven water conflicts, I was recruited directly. But that was 4 years ago, and now you're chasing shadow conspiracies through dust storms in rural America," Sophie observed, with a hint of wry humor despite their situation. "Career advancement?" A small chuckle came through the speaker. "Something like that. The Valencia case has been my focus for nearly 2 years. What started as routine anomalies in water rights transactions led to connections with state officials, regulatory manipulation, and eventually the deep aquifer angle. It's the kind of case that defines a career." She paused, assuming one survives it. The casual reference to survival sent a chill through Elena that had nothing to do with her respiratory distress. The stakes of their situation remained life and death, a reality that momentary banter couldn't diminish. "I see lights ahead," Sophie reported suddenly, slowing their vehicle. "Stationary, just off the road to the right." Elena leaned forward, straining to see through the windshield. Approximately half a mile ahead, faint lights glowed through the falling dust, too steady for vehicle headlights, suggesting a structure of some kind. "That's not the Riverdale facility," she said with certainty. "We're still at least 6 miles out. Could be the Peterson place, though I thought they'd abandoned it after last year's failed harvest." Diana's voice cut through with immediate authority. "Approach with caution. Kill your headlights at 300 yards and coast past at minimal speed. Could be nothing. Could be an ambush point." Sophie complied, reducing their speed while preparing to switch off the headlights on her command. Elena felt tension building again in her chest. Not respiratory this time, but the primal instinct that had helped humans survive as prey long before they became predators. Something about those lights felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. 300 yards, Diana announced. "Lights off now." The sudden darkness was disorienting, their world instantly reduced to shadowy shapes barely visible in the ambient light reflected by the dust. Sophie kept the vehicle moving forward, At a crawl, navigating more by feel than sight as they approached the mysterious lights. As they drew closer, the source became clear. A roadblock consisting of two vehicles positioned across County Road 27, their emergency lights flashing in patterns that suggested official authority. Men in what appeared to be uniform jackets moved around the vehicles, ostensibly checking something on the road surface. "County Sheriff," Sophie whispered, as though they might be overheard from outside the vehicle. "Should we approach? They could help us." "No," Diana and Elena replied simultaneously, their instincts aligned. "Sheriff Menendez drives a white SUV with county markings," Elena explained. "Those are unmarked black vehicles, just like the ones at our farm, and the county wouldn't have deputies out checking road conditions in the middle of a dust storm. They'd be responding to emergencies only." "It's a trap," Diana confirmed. "They've set up a choke point on the assumption we'd take the most direct route to potential backup. We need an alternate path immediately." Elena studied what little she could see of their surroundings, drawing on mental maps formed through decades of traveling these roads in all conditions. "There's a service road about quarter-mile back," she said, "used for access to the irrigation canal. It's unpaved and rough, but it runs parallel to the county road for about 4 miles before rejoining it east of where they're set up." "Can these vehicles handle it?" Diana asked. "If anything can," Sophie replied. "They're built for this kind of terrain." With careful precision, Sophie executed a 3-point turn on the narrow county road, dousing even their taillights to avoid detection. Moving solely by memory and the faint outline of drainage ditches on either side, she backtracked until Elena indicated they had reached the turnoff. The service road was little more than a maintenance path, unmarked and untraveled for months. Dust had drifted across it in waves, creating an undulating surface that challenged even the SUV's capable suspension system. They moved slowly, every bump and dip transmitted through the chassis in a way that aggravated Elena's tender lungs. "They'll realize we've bypassed them eventually," Diana noted through the communication system, her vehicle following closely in their tracks. "But it buys us time and demonstrates that we have local knowledge they may not have anticipated." Elena nodded grimly, though Diana couldn't see the gesture. Local knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of generations spent learning every contour and characteristic of the land, might be their only substantial advantage against pursuers with superior numbers, equipment, and training. As they bounced along the forgotten service road, Elena found herself reflecting on the strange convergence of circumstances that had brought them to this point. Her simple act of rescue during a dust storm had unexpectedly connected her to a conspiracy that had apparently been unfolding beneath her feet for years. The land that had been slowly slipping away from her through financial pressure now revealed itself as far more valuable than she had ever imagined, and far more dangerous. The navigation system showed them making a wide arc around the roadblock, gradually working their way back toward County Road 27, beyond the point where it had been obstructed. If they could reach the Riverdale facility undetected, they might have a defensible position to await rescue once the storm cleared enough for Diana's backup to arrive. It was a tenuous plan, riddled with potential failure points. But as Elena had learned through decades of farming in an unpredictable climate, sometimes the only viable strategy was to adapt, persevere, and trust that preparation would meet opportunity somewhere along the way. As they continued their cautious progress through the storm, Elena found herself oddly grateful, despite their perilous circumstances. Her breathing had stabilized with medication. Her daughter was demonstrating the capability and clear thinking Eleanor had always hoped she possessed. And in Diana Keller, they had found an ally whose skills might just be sufficient to see them through this crisis alive. For a woman who had faced the imminent loss of everything just hours earlier, it represented a strange sort of progress, trading one desperate situation for another, but with renewed purpose and unexpected allies. Whatever came next, Elena Martinez was determined to face it with the same stubborn resilience that had defined her approach to life for nearly 4 decades on her family's land. Sophie glanced at her mother, noticing the determined set of her jaw that had always signaled Elena's refusal to surrender to circumstance. "We're going to make it through this," she said with the absolute certainty that only children and the very wise can muster. "And when we do, those people trying to steal our land will wish they'd never heard of Martinez Farm." For the first time since the crisis began, Elena felt a smile form, not of amusement, but of fierce pride in the unbreakable spirit her daughter had inherited from generations of women who had fought to preserve their place in an often hostile world. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, that legacy would endure. The Riverdale processing plant appeared through the diminishing dust like a fortress emerging from fog. What had once been a traditional cotton gin had been transformed by county renovations into a utilitarian emergency command center, all practical function with little concern for aesthetics. The main building, now converted to house emergency response equipment, dominated the property with its reinforced concrete walls and metal roof. Adjacent storage structures formed a rough semicircle around a central yard, creating a compound that felt both secure and isolated. Elena directed Sophie to approach from the western access road, a less obvious entry point than the main drive. Diana followed in the second SUV, maintaining communication through the vehicle's linked systems. The storm had continued its gradual retreat, visibility improving with each passing minute. What had initially seemed a blessing now raised new concerns. Clearer conditions would make their position easier to spot for pursuers. "Circle once before entering," Diana instructed. "Look for signs of recent activity or surveillance equipment." Sophie complied, making a wide loop around the facility's perimeter. Nothing suggested the place had been visited since the last dust storm several days earlier. No tracks disturbed the drifts surrounding the buildings, and no lights gleamed. From within the compound, "Looks clear," Sophie reported, bringing their vehicle to a stop near a small side entrance to the main building. "What's our approach?" "I'll secure the interior," Diana replied, her training evident in the methodical response. "You assist your mother inside once I confirm it's safe. We'll establish defensive positions and activate communication equipment if available." Elena wanted to protest being treated as a liability requiring special handling, but her respiratory condition made such objections hollow. The inhaler had stabilized her immediate symptoms, but exhaustion and dust exposure were taking their toll. Each breath sent sharp reminders through her chest that her lungs weren't what they once were. Diana exited her vehicle smoothly, service weapon drawn, but held low as she approached the side entrance. The door was secured with a standard county padlock, substantial but not impenetrable. She examined it briefly before retrieving a small toolkit from her pocket. Practical skills they teach at the White House. Sophie observed through their open window as Diana efficiently manipulated the lock mechanism. "Actually, misspent youth. In New Mexico before I found geology," she replied, with unexpected candor, not looking up from her work. "Reformed juvenile delinquent makes good. The government doesn't need to know everything about your background." The lock yielded with a satisfying click, and Diana disappeared inside the building after signaling them to wait. Elena and Sophie sat in tense silence, watching the darkness beyond the vehicle's windows for any sign of pursuit. The navigation system's clock read 9:38 p.m., still hours before potential reinforcements could arrive, assuming the weather continued to improve. 5 minutes later, Diana reappeared in the doorway, holstering her weapon. "Clear. Power's on. Basic heat functioning. There's even satellite communication equipment for emergency coordination." With Sophie's assistance, Elena made her way into the facility. The interior was Spartan but practical. A large central area housed several emergency vehicles and response equipment, while offices and communication rooms lined the perimeter. Diana had activated minimal lighting, enough to navigate without making the building a beacon in the night. "County Emergency Operations Center," she explained, leading them to a small room equipped with radio equipment, computers, and a large map of the region marked with grid coordinates. "Basic but functional. I've already transmitted our coordinates and situation assessment to my team using the satellite uplink." Elena sank gratefully into a chair at the communications desk, her stamina finally reaching its limit. The room was warming gradually as the building's heating system filtered the dust from the air. She removed her outer layers, noting with dismay how deeply the fine soil had penetrated every fold of fabric despite their precautions. "You need to rest," Sophie said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. "Diana and I can handle security. There's a cot in the corner, probably for operators during extended emergency response." Elena wanted to protest but found she lacked the energy. Years of stubborn self-reliance warred briefly with physical reality before surrendering to necessity. She allowed Sophie to help her to the cot, settling onto it with a sigh that contained equal parts relief and frustration. "What's our defensive posture?" she asked Diana, unwilling to be completely sidelined despite her condition. Diana had been examining the facility's floor plan posted on the wall, marking notes on a small notepad. "Single-point entry defense isn't viable with our numbers. We'll create a monitored perimeter using the security cameras, establish fallback positions, and prepare contingencies." Her professional assessment continued, outlining fields of fire and potential vulnerabilities, but Eleanor found herself struggling to focus as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness. The medication, stress, and physical exertion combined to create an overwhelming fatigue, unlike anything she had experienced since the days immediately following Manuel's death. "Rest," Sophie urged, seeing her mother struggle to stay engaged. "We've got this covered." Elena reluctantly yielded, allowing her eyes to close, while Diana and Sophie continued their security preparations. Their voices faded as she drifted into much-needed sleep. Her last conscious thought was a strange mixture of concern and pride. Concern for their dangerous circumstances, pride in her daughter's capability under pressure. She awoke disoriented, uncertain how much time had passed. The room remained, dimly lit, but something had changed, an alertness in the air, a tension that penetrated even her exhausted state. Elena sat up carefully, noting with relief that her breathing had improved significantly during her rest. Sophie stood by the communications desk, speaking in low tones with Diana as they studied something on one of the monitors. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. Both turned, Sophie's expression revealing surprise and something else, concern perhaps, or anticipation. "About 2 hours, Diana replied, glancing at her watch. "Storm's nearly past. Visibility excellent now, with just light dust still falling." "Your government backup?" Elena asked hopefully. "En route, ETA approximately 30 minutes. She hesitated, before adding, "But we have another development." Eleanor stood, moving to join them at the monitor. The screen displayed a thermal imaging feed from one of the facility's security cameras, showing 3 vehicles approaching along County Road 27 from the west, the direction of Martinez Farm. "They found us," Sophie stated grimly. "Not necessarily," Diana countered. "They're conducting a systematic search pattern along likely routes. We haven't observed any behavior indicating they know our specific location yet." Elena studied the approaching vehicles, noting their careful, measured progress. "How long until they reach us?" "At their current speed, 15 minutes, maybe less. Diana's tone remained measured, professional. "We have options. The satellite communication is secure. They can't track it. My team is inbound with multiple vehicles. If we maintain a low profile, they might pass by without investigating this facility." It was the rational approach, minimizing risk while maximizing their chance of surviving until reinforcements arrived. Elena understood the logic, but found herself struggling with the implications, hiding, waiting, hoping not to be discovered. It ran counter to her nature, particularly when the threat was approaching her daughter. "And if they don't pass by?" she asked. "If they conduct a thorough search of every possible location, including this one?" Diana met her gaze directly. "Then we defend our position as long as necessary. I have tactical training and adequate ammunition. This building has multiple fallback points and limited approaches. We can hold out until backup arrives." Sophie had been unusually quiet during this exchange, her attention focused on a different monitor displaying topographical features of the surrounding area. Now she looked up, determination evident in her expression. "There's another option," she said. We split up. Both Elena and Diana turned to her with varying degrees of surprise and concern. "I can take one vehicle and create a diversion," Sophie continued, pointing to a route on the map. "Draw them away from here, giving you both a better chance of remaining undetected until help arrives." "Absolutely not," Elena responded immediately, maternal instinct overriding tactical considerations. "We stay together." "It makes strategic sense," Sophie argued. "Diana needs to protect the Valencia evidence, and you're in no condition for any kind of mobile evasion. I'm the logical choice to draw them off." Diana had not immediately rejected the proposal, her tactical mind evidently considering its merits despite the risks. "It's unnecessarily dangerous," she finally said, "but not entirely without merit if properly executed." Elena stared at them both, disbelieving. "We're talking about sending my 12-year-old daughter alone to deliberately attract the attention of armed professionals who have already demonstrated willingness to kill." "Mom," Sophie said gently, "I'm not suggesting a heroic last stand, just a diversion. Make them chase shadows while you two remain secure. I know these roads, even in night conditions. They don't." The room fell silent as the implications hung in the air. Elena felt torn between tactical logic and maternal instinct, between acknowledging her daughter's emerging capabilities and protecting her as she had done since birth. Before she could formulate a response, Diana's satellite phone chirped with an incoming transmission. "Keller," she answered crisply, stepping slightly away from them for privacy. Her expression shifted as she listened. Professional composure, momentarily surprised by whatever information she was receiving. "Confirm that intelligence. Yes, understood. Will maintain position and await extraction." She ended the call, turning back to them with renewed urgency. "Situation has evolved. My team intercepted communications indicating their reinforcements are also inbound. Private contractors with helicopter support, ETA similar to our backup. This just became a race." The tactical dynamics had shifted dramatically. What had been a waiting game now transformed into a countdown. Whichever side received support first would likely determine the outcome. "My diversion plan makes even more sense now," Sophie insisted. "If I can delay their ground forces, it might prevent them from establishing a landing zone for their air support." Diana considered this, tactical calculations visible in her expression. A properly executed diversion could buy critical time, she acknowledged reluctantly, but it would require precise timing and immediate extraction once our support arrives. Elena watched this discussion with growing alarm, seeing her daughter volunteer for a dangerous mission with the calm rationality that reminded her painfully of Manuel. Her late husband had possessed the same clear-eyed courage, the same willingness to accept necessary risks for proper cause. Sophie had inherited more than just his eyes and smile. "I can't let you do this," Elena said, though with less conviction than before. Sophie's response was gentle but firm. "Mom, for my entire life I've watched you sacrifice everything to protect our farm and our family. Now it's my turn to help save both." She turned to Diana. "What exactly would maximize the effectiveness of this diversion?" Diana hesitated, only briefly, before professional training took over. "Draw them at least 3 miles from this position. Maintain constant movement. If they focus on pursuit, they can't establish a secure LZ for their air support. Avoid direct engagement. The goal is distraction, not confrontation." As they discussed tactical details, Elena found herself experiencing a profound shift in perspective. For over a decade, since becoming a mother, she had defined herself as the protector, the decision-maker, the one who shouldered burdens so others wouldn't have to. Now, watching her daughter calmly prepare to risk herself, Elena recognized that her role had changed without her noticing. Sophie wasn't just her child anymore. She was becoming her own person, making choices based on values Elena had spent a lifetime demonstrating. "If you're doing this," Elena finally said, interrupting their planning, "you need to understand something important." She waited until she had both their attention. "The county graded the East Canal Road last summer. It's not on any maps yet, but it connects through the old Miller property all the way to Highway 14. If you need an escape route they won't know about, that's your best option." The information, practical, specific, drawing on local knowledge no outsider could possess, was Elena's way of accepting the inevitable while still contributing to her daughter's safety. Sophie recognized it for what it was, nodding with both gratitude and understanding. "Take this," Diana added, removing a small device from her pocket and handing it to Sophie. "Emergency transponder. Keep it deactivated until you absolutely need extraction. My team will monitor for the signal." The preparations moved quickly after that. Sophie gathered essential supplies while Diana coordinated with her inbound team, adjusting their approach to account for the new plan. Elena focused on providing detailed terrain information that might give her daughter even the slightest advantage. Every drainage culvert, every windbreak, every feature that might offer momentary cover or tactical opportunity. As Sophie prepared to depart, Elena pulled her into a fierce embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't adequately express. No dramatic speeches, no emotional declarations, just the unspoken understanding between them that they each now carried aspects of the other's strength. 30 minutes maximum, Diana instructed as Sophie headed for the door. Then return regardless of circumstances. Our window for extraction will be narrow and precise. Sophie acknowledged the instruction with a determined nod before disappearing into the night. Through the window, Elena watched her daughter's vehicle navigate carefully away from the facility, lights extinguished to avoid immediate detection. Pride and fear warred within her, neither gaining clear advantage. "She'll be fine," Diana said quietly, joining Elena at the window. "Your daughter has remarkable capabilities under pressure, like her mother." The compliment, delivered with professional assessment rather than empty reassurance, offered genuine comfort. Elena had observed Diana's tactical judgment firsthand. If she believed in Sophie's ability to execute this mission, there was solid basis for that confidence. They returned to the monitoring station, watching the thermal feeds as Sophie's vehicle made its way across the landscape. The approaching convoy had reached a position approximately 1 mile from their location, still moving in a search pattern that suggested they hadn't identified the county facility as a target. "Look there!" Diana pointed, as Sophie's vehicle suddenly accelerated along a perpendicular route that would intersect the convoy's path. "She's making her move." Elena held her breath as the thermal signatures converged. Sophie's vehicle crossed the convoy's route perhaps half a mile ahead of them, clearly visible before disappearing behind a stand of trees. The effect was immediate. All three pursuing vehicles changed course, accelerating toward the point where Sophie had been spotted. "Perfect execution," Diana commented, professional appreciation evident in her tone. "She's drawn them away from our position and toward empty terrain with multiple escape routes." The chase unfolded on their monitors like a silent film. Thermal signatures moving across the landscape in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Sophie maintained enough distance to prevent direct engagement while keeping her pursuers fully committed to the chase. Each time they adjusted their approach to try cutting her off, she would shift to an unexpected direction that utilized terrain features invisible in the darkness. "She's using the contours of the land," Eleanor explained, recognizing patterns in her daughter's movement. "Those dips and rises aren't visible to someone who doesn't know they're there, especially at night. But if you've grown up exploring that ground your whole life..." "Local knowledge trumping technology," Diana finished, nodding with understanding. "An advantage no amount of equipment can overcome." For 23 tense minutes, they watched Sophie lead her pursuers on an increasingly frustrated chase, drawing them nearly 5 miles from the county facility. Elena's heart swelled with pride, even as anxiety maintained its grip. Her daughter was demonstrating not just courage, but intelligence and skill, using every advantage while minimizing unnecessary risks. Diana's satellite phone chirped again. "Keller," she answered, listening intently before the tension in her shoulders visibly released. "Understood. Landing zone coordinates transmitted. We're ready for extraction." She turned to Elena with the first genuine smile she'd seen since meeting her in the dust storm. "Our team has established ground superiority. Their helicopter turned back when our assets were detected. Extraction team is 3 minutes from our position." Relief flooded through Elena, though tempered by concern for Sophie, still leading pursuers through the night landscape. "What about my daughter?" "Transponder activated 2 minutes ago," Diana replied, checking her equipment. "Extraction team is diverting to her position after securing us. Her distraction worked perfectly. Their forces are scattered and disorganized now." Before Eleanor could respond, a new sound penetrated the building, the distinctive rumble of heavy vehicles approaching rapidly. Diana moved to the window, verifying the vehicle's markings before nodding with satisfaction. "Presidential security detail," she confirmed. "We're secure." Events accelerated after that. 3 black SUVs with government markings pulled into the compound, disgorging 8 agents in tactical gear who secured the building perimeter with practiced efficiency. Diana transferred the Valencia evidence to her team leader, while medics attended to Elena, checking her respiratory status and administering supplemental medication. "Your daughter's transponder shows her stationary at a position approximately 4 miles southeast," one of the tactical team reported to Diana. "Extraction vehicle is en route. ETA 3 minutes." Elena insisted on waiting outside despite the lingering dust, watching the eastern horizon where the first star was becoming visible as the storm's remnants finally cleared. After hours of darkness and danger, the approaching night sky felt symbolic in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Diana joined her, now wearing a presidential task force windbreaker over her borrowed clothes. "Second team reports successful. Extraction," she informed her quietly. "Your daughter is secure and uninjured. They're bringing her here now." The weight that lifted from Elena's shoulders at this news nearly brought her to her knees. She hadn't realized how completely her concern for Sophie had occupied her consciousness until the fear was removed. Diana seemed to understand, offering a steadying hand that she accepted without embarrassment. "What happens now?" she asked, as they waited for the second vehicle's arrival. "Officially or practically?" Diana replied with a hint of wry humor. "Both. Officially, you and your daughter are witnesses in a federal investigation into corruption, water rights manipulation, and conspiracy. You'll need to provide statements, possibly testify if cases go to trial. She paused, considering Elena thoughtfully. Practically, your farm sits on a strategic resource that remains relevant regardless of criminal prosecutions. That reality won't change. Elena understood the implication. The deep aquifer beneath her struggling farm would continue to attract attention, legitimate or otherwise. The immediate threat might be neutralized, but the underlying cause remained. What would you do, she asked, if it were your family, your land? Diana considered the question with evident care. I'd recognize that sometimes value attracts predators, whether that value is financial, strategic, or personal. The question isn't whether they'll come, it's how prepared you are when they do. The conversation paused as the distinctive sound of the extraction vehicle approached from the east. Elena watched it appear over a rise in the road, headlights now gleaming in the clear night air as it descended toward them. Through the side window, she could make out Sophie's figure, and something tight in her chest finally released completely. As the vehicle stopped and her daughter emerged, Elena found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple act of rescue during a dust storm. What had started as one crisis, the imminent loss of her family farm, had transformed into something far more complex, but also paradoxically filled with new possibility. "You know," Diana said, watching the reunion between mother and daughter with professional detachment tempered by genuine empathy, the federal government has specialized programs that work with private landowners on water conservation and aquifer protection, arrangements that benefit both national interests and the property owners. It's not standard procedure, but given the circumstances. Elena understood the offer beneath her carefully neutral phrasing, a potential path forward that might preserve the Martinez legacy while acknowledging the new reality they had discovered. Not charity, but partnership based on mutual benefit. "Might be worth discussing," she allowed, watching Sophie approach through the now clear night air. "After things settle a bit." The stars emerged fully overhead as Sophie reached them, illuminating the landscape with silver light that transformed overnight dangers into evening tranquility. Elena embraced her daughter, the simple physical confirmation of her safety more powerful than any words could express. As they stood together watching the stars, Elena reflected on how completely their world had changed in less than 24 hours. The farm that had been slipping away through financial pressure now represented something entirely different. Not just land to be worked, but strategic ground to be protected. Not just a family legacy, but potentially a national asset. Most importantly, the desperate last stand of a failing single mother had transformed into something with multiple paths forward, each requiring careful consideration rather than resigned acceptance of inevitable loss. The buried truth beneath their struggling farm had been revealed not through their own efforts, but through a chance encounter with a stranger during a dust storm. A sudden commotion near the command center caught their attention. Diana was speaking urgently with her team leader, who had just received a communication. Her expression shifted from surprise to what appeared to be cautious optimism. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, rejoining them. "The President has been personally briefed on our situation." "The President of the United States?" Sophie asked, eyes widening. Diana nodded. Water security is one of his administration's top priorities. Apparently, when he heard that a single mother farmer helped uncover a conspiracy threatening the nation's agricultural water reserves, he wants to personally thank you. Elena stared at her in disbelief. "The President wants to thank me? For what? I just helped someone stuck in a storm. Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone would have," Diana countered. "And not everyone would have raised a daughter brave enough to lead armed pursuers on a chase to protect others." The President recognizes the symbolism of your story. Rural America protecting the nation's resources against corporate corruption. It's powerful. Before Elena could fully process this information, Diana's satellite phone chimed again. The conversation was brief, consisting mostly of "yes, sir," and "understood," before she disconnected, looking slightly stunned. "What now?" Elena asked, noting her changed demeanor. "Change of plans. The President has directed Marine One to divert to our location after his scheduled appearance in Albuquerque tomorrow. He's coming here to meet you both, personally." Sophie gasped. "The President is coming to meet us? Tomorrow?" "Apparently, your mother's story resonated with him. A single mother fighting to save her generational farm while unknowingly sitting on a resource critical to national security. It aligns perfectly with his rural revitalization initiative." Eleanor struggled to comprehend the rapid turn of events. Hours ago, she'd been facing foreclosure and the loss of everything her family had built over generations. Now, the President of the United States was planning to visit her property. "But the farm is a mess," she said, the practical farmer in her automatically assessing the work required. "The storm damage, the intruders." "Don't worry about that," Diana assured her. "A presidential advance team will handle everything. They're experts at transforming locations for official visits." As they began discussing logistics for the unprecedented visit, Elena felt a strange sense of coming full circle. Her great-great-grandmother had established their farm against all odds, a Mexican immigrant woman creating something from nothing through sheer determination. Now, 5 generations later, another Martinez woman had fought to preserve that legacy, unwittingly becoming a symbol of America's agricultural heartland in the process. "Ready to head home, Mom?" Sophie asked, the simple question containing layers of meaning after all they had experienced. Elena nodded, looking toward the west where their farm lay waiting. "Home," she agreed. "We've got some new planning to do." As the security team prepared for departure, Elena found herself considering Diana's words about value attracting predators. The deep aquifer beneath their land represented both opportunity and danger, a resource to be managed rather than simply possessed, much like the farm itself, which had never been merely property to the Martinez family, but a responsibility passed through generations. The stars continued shining over a landscape transformed by revelation, illuminating possibilities that had been hidden in darkness just hours earlier. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with clearer understanding of both what lay beneath their feet and what stood beside them. The strength of family, the value of local knowledge, and the unexpected allies that sometimes appear precisely when needed most. As they prepared to return to Martinez Farm, not in defeat but as reclamation, Eleanor reflected that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from desperate searching, but from simple acts of humanity during life's most challenging storms. And tomorrow, presidential helicopters would land in her field, transforming a story of private struggle into a national conversation about the resources that sustain America's future. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air and reveal what truly matters. Not just the water hidden beneath the surface, but the courage residing within ordinary people who refuse to surrender what they love, even when all hope seems lost. Dawn broke over Martinez Farm with golden light that transformed the aftermath of the dust storm into something almost beautiful. Where yesterday there had been swirling chaos, today there was a strange stillness. Dust settled into sculptural forms across the property, giving familiar landmarks an otherworldly quality. Elena stood on her front porch, coffee cup warming her hands as she surveyed the landscape that had been in her family for generations. Beside her, Sophie was uncharacteristically quiet, both of them processing the whirlwind of the past 18 hours. It doesn't seem real, Sophie finally said, gesturing toward the government vehicles parked alongside their weathered pickup truck. A dozen personnel in dark suits and tactical gear had established a perimeter around the property, while others methodically swept the buildings to ensure no threats remained. "The President of the United States is coming here to our farm." Elena nodded, still struggling to fully comprehend it herself. "Your great-great-grandmother would never believe it. She used to hide whenever government officials came around, afraid they'd take the land back even though she had the deed." A small smile crossed Sophie's face. "And now we're getting a presidential visit because we didn't sell." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The very thing that had made the Martinez family stubborn outliers in a region increasingly dominated by corporate agriculture, their refusal to sell regardless of financial pressure, had unexpectedly positioned them at the center of national attention. Diana Keller approached from the main house, tablet in hand, looking remarkably composed. Despite having been awake for over 24 hours, she had traded her borrowed farm clothes for a crisp pantsuit that an aide had delivered at dawn, though Elena noticed she had kept Manuel's work jacket folded carefully over her arm rather than discarding it. "Advance team will be here within the hour," she reported, joining them on the porch. "Marine One is scheduled to land at 1100 hours. The President has allocated 30 minutes on the ground, which is significant given his schedule." "What exactly happens during a presidential visit?" Elena asked, practical concerns surfacing through her amazement. "Should we prepare something? Is there a protocol?" Diana's expression softened slightly. "Just be yourselves. That's what caught his attention in the first place. The team will handle security, media positioning, and all logistics. You just need to be ready to meet him when he arrives." She hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic gentleness, "And try not to worry about the farm's appearance. The storm damage actually reinforces the narrative, resilient Americans facing challenges beyond their control." Before Elena could respond, a convoy of vehicles turned onto their long driveway, 3 large vans with government markings, 2 media trucks, and several official-looking SUVs. The presidential advance team had arrived. What followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced in her lifetime of rural isolation. Within minutes, her modest farmhouse and surrounding property transformed into a hive of coordinated activity. Communication specialists established satellite uplinks, while security personnel conducted meticulous sweeps of every structure. Media coordinators identified optimal camera positions, and facilities teams assessed what minimal modifications might be needed to accommodate the brief presidential visit. Through it all, Elena and Sophie watched with a mixture of awe and bemusement as their private struggle suddenly became a carefully orchestrated public moment, an opportunity for the administration to highlight its commitment to rural America and water security while telling a story of ordinary heroism that would resonate across political divides. "Ms. Martinez?" A woman in a tailored suit approached, clipboard in hand. "I'm Rebecca Winters, White House Deputy Communications Director. We'd like to briefly discuss positioning and potential talking points for the President's visit." Elena straightened, suddenly conscious of her dusty work clothes and the lingering effects of their ordeal visible in her tired eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean by talking points. We're just farmers." Rebecca smiled with practiced warmth. "That's precisely why the President wants to meet you, authentic Americans facing real challenges. We just want to ensure the interaction highlights the themes of rural resilience and resource protection that make your story so compelling." Sophie watched this exchange with a perceptiveness beyond her years, sensing the subtle shaping of narrative happening before their eyes. "Our story is about doing what's right even when it's hard," she interjected, with characteristic directness. Mom helped someone in trouble during a storm. That person turned out to be important, but Mom would have done the same for anyone. Rebecca turned her practiced smile toward Sophie, clearly reassessing the 12-year-old's role in their messaging strategy. Absolutely. The selfless action that revealed something much bigger. That's exactly the story Americans need to hear right now. As the communications team continued their preparations, Diana pulled Elena aside, speaking quietly. They're going to try to craft this into something that serves political purposes. That's their job. But don't forget what actually happened. Here, you made a moral choice that had nothing to do with politics. That's what matters. Elena nodded, grateful for Diana's grounding perspective amid the escalating surreality. Will you be here when the president arrives? Front row, Diana confirmed. This case is too significant for me to be sidelined, even by the communications team. The Valencia documents have already been transmitted to Justice Department investigators. Arrests are being processed as we speak. A technician approached, interrupting their conversation. Ma'am, we need your input on landing zone preparation. The recent storm has created some concerns about surface stability. Diana excused herself, leaving Elena momentarily alone amidst the controlled chaos transforming her property. She used the opportunity to slip away, walking toward the old barn, where generations of Martinez women had weathered previous storms, both literal and figurative. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and earth provided a momentary sanctuary from the unprecedented activity outside. Elena ran her hand along the wooden support beam where her family had marked heights over decades, her own childhood measurements, then Sophie's growing lines, each notch recording the passage of time and the continuity of their connection to this land. 5 generations of struggle, sacrifice, and stubborn persistence etched into the weathered wood. This is still our home, she whispered to herself, drawing strength from the physical reminder of her lineage. No matter who visits today. The sound of footsteps interrupted her reflection. Sophie entered the barn, followed by a man carrying professional camera equipment. Mom, this is Mr. Ramirez from the White House documentation team. He's asking permission to photograph our family markers. Elena turned, instinctively protective of this private space. Why? The photographer smiled apologetically. Human touches, ma'am. The president likes to connect personally with the people he meets. Family history resonates with him. Elena hesitated, then nodded slowly. This small invasion of privacy seemed a reasonable exchange for the unprecedented assistance now flowing toward their farm. Within hours, the foreclosure threat had been legally suspended pending a federal investigation. Water rights specialists were already analyzing how the Martinez property could be protected from future manipulation. The grant application Elena had submitted weeks earlier had somehow found its way to the top of the review pile. The photographer worked quickly, documenting the height markers with quiet respect rather than intrusive curiosity. My grandmother had something similar in her house in Veracruz, he commented, surprising Elena. 5 generations marked on the kitchen doorframe, before the house was lost in a hurricane. The simple exchange reminded Elena that behind the official machinery now occupying her farm were individual people with their own connections to land and legacy. It was a humanizing moment amid the increasingly theatrical preparations. 15 minutes to security lockdown, a voice announced over portable radios carried by the advance team. All positions, finalize preparations. Sophie looked at her mother with sudden urgency. We should change clothes. In the whirlwind of activity, Elena had almost forgotten this basic courtesy. They hurried back to the house, where they discovered another unexpected development. 2 garment bags had been delivered to the front room, each with a simple note: suggested attire for presidential meeting, White House Protocol Office. Elena unzipped the larger bag to find a tasteful navy blue dress with a subtle pattern, reminiscent of traditional Mexican textiles, clearly selected to acknowledge her heritage without being overtly political. Sophie's bag contained a similar outfit scaled for her size. "They think of everything," Sophie said, examining the thoughtfully selected clothing. "Do we have to wear these?" Elena considered the question, recognizing it wasn't just about clothes, but about how much of their identity would be shaped by outside forces today. "No," she decided. "We don't have to wear anything we don't want to. But these are nice, and they save us having to decide what's appropriate for meeting a president." They compromised by incorporating elements of their own selection: Elena's turquoise necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, Sophie's handmade bracelet created from copper wire salvaged from old farm equipment. Small assertions of authenticity amid the choreographed event unfolding around them. As they completed their preparations, the distant sound of helicopters became audible, first as a faint thrum that gradually intensified into the unmistakable cadence of Marine One approaching. Outside, the advance team moved with practiced precision, confirming security positions and establishing the final perimeter. Diana appeared at their door, now wearing her official Presidential Task Force credentials prominently displayed. "It's time," she said simply. "They've designated a reception position near the eastern field." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Sophie, remember who we are today. No matter what happens, we're still the same people who were fighting for this farm yesterday." Her daughter nodded, surprising Elena by reaching for her hand, something the increasingly independent 12-year-old rarely did anymore. "We're Martinez women," Sophie said with quiet determination. "We don't break easily." Together, they walked toward the designated meeting area, where a small platform had been constructed overnight. American flags now flew on either side of a podium bearing the presidential seal. Media representatives had established positions behind security cordons, cameras ready to capture the historic moment when the President of the United States would set foot on Martinez Farm. The sound of helicopters grew deafening as Marine One appeared over the eastern tree line, followed by 2 identical decoy helicopters, standard security protocol even for rural visits. The massive machines created artificial windstorms that stirred the settled dust back into swirling patterns as they approached the designated landing zone. Elena and Sophie stood with Diana at the reception point, watching as the central helicopter touched down with precision on the marker established by the advance team. For a long moment after the rotors slowed, nothing happened. Then the door opened and security personnel emerged, establishing a protective formation before the president himself appeared in the doorway. Even from a distance, his presence carried an unmistakable gravity, the physical embodiment of an office larger than any individual who temporarily occupied it. As he descended the steps and walked toward them, Elena was struck by how ordinary and extraordinary he appeared simultaneously, just a man in a suit, yet carrying the weight of history and global consequence with each step. "Miss Martinez," he said warmly as he reached them, extending his hand with practiced ease. "I've been hearing remarkable things about you and your daughter. Thank you for exemplifying the best of America's spirit." The prepared words were delivered with genuine appreciation that transcended their obvious political utility. Elena found herself responding not to the office, but to the human connection being offered. One parent recognizing another's protective instincts. "Mr. President," she replied, shaking his hand firmly, "welcome to our farm. This is my daughter, Sophie." Sophie stepped forward with composure that made Elena's heart swell with pride. "Thank you for coming, Mr. President. It's an honor to meet you." The president smiled, clearly appreciative of her poise. "The honor is mine, young lady. Your courage yesterday has already become legendary among my security team. Not many 12-year-olds could outmaneuver professional pursuers." He turned, his attention back to Elena. "I understand you've been fighting to save this farm for years, even before yesterday's extraordinary events. That kind of persistence is what built this country." The cameras captured every moment of the exchange, documenting what would doubtless appear on evening news broadcasts nationwide. The president celebrating ordinary Americans who had unknowingly protected a national resource while fighting for their family legacy. What the cameras couldn't capture was the brief, unscripted conversation that followed as they walked toward the podium for the formal remarks. The president slowed his pace, allowing them a moment of relative privacy. "Ms. Martinez," he said quietly, "beyond the official proceedings today, I want you to know that your situation has highlighted a critical gap in our rural support systems. Farm families shouldn't have to choose between medical care and keeping their land." Elena was startled by this direct acknowledgement of the financial pressures that had nearly cost them everything. "It's been challenging," she admitted. "After my husband died, there were so many barriers to accessing help." The president nodded thoughtfully. "I've directed my agricultural policy team to examine those barriers specifically. Your experience might help other families avoid similar struggles." This unexpected policy dimension transcended the carefully crafted photo opportunity, suggesting that their ordeal might contribute to meaningful change beyond their own circumstances. It was a sobering reminder that individual stories sometimes created ripples that affected distant shores. As they reached the podium, the formal proceedings began. The president spoke with practiced eloquence about water security, rural resilience, and the ordinary heroism of Americans facing extraordinary challenges. Elena and Sophie stood beside him, visual symbols of the abstract principles being articulated for national consumption. "The Martinez family represents the best traditions of our agricultural communities," the president declared, gesturing toward them. "For 5 generations, they have served as stewards of this land, preserving it through dust storms, economic hardship, and personal tragedy. When we talk about American resilience, this is what we mean." The carefully crafted narrative wove together their personal struggle with broader national themes, transforming their private ordeal into a potent public symbol. Elena listened with a mixture of recognition and distance. The events being described were technically accurate, yet somehow abstracted from the fear and desperation she had actually experienced. When the president invited her to speak, Elena approached the microphone with trepidation. She had prepared no remarks, having been overwhelmed by the rapid developments. For a moment she stood silently, looking out at the assembled media and government officials gathered on her family's land. Then her eyes found Sophie's encouraging gaze, and she found her authentic voice. "Yesterday, I was just trying to save our farm," she began simply. "I've been fighting for years to hold on to this land, not because it's valuable in the way people usually measure value, but because it holds our family's story. Every generation of Martinez women has faced their own storms on this soil." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I had no idea there was something precious hidden beneath our fields. I was just trying to help someone stranded in a dust storm because that's what my parents taught me to do. That's what I've taught my daughter to do. We help each other through the bad weather, literal or figurative." The unscripted sincerity of her words created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The political theater momentarily receded, replaced by genuine human connection. What I've learned through all this is that sometimes the most valuable things remain hidden until conditions force them to be revealed. There was an aquifer under our feet that we never knew about. There was courage in my daughter that emerged when we needed it most, and there are networks of support we never imagined would reach our small farm. That creates a responsibility I take seriously, not just as a farmer, but as an American. She stepped back from the microphone to unexpected applause, not just from the officials present, but from local community members who had gathered at the security perimeter to witness the unprecedented presidential visit to Copper Valley. The president returned to the podium, clearly appreciative of her unvarnished authenticity. "This is why I wanted to come here personally," he acknowledged, "to witness firsthand the connection between this family and their land, and to assure them that their government recognizes both the value of that connection and the resource they've been unknowingly protecting." He turned toward Elena and Sophie. "The Martinez farm will receive our full support in implementing a model water conservation program that maintains family ownership while securing critical national resources. This partnership represents the future of rural sustainability, honoring traditional stewardship while embracing scientific innovation." The formal announcement confirmed what Diana had suggested the previous night, a path forward that preserved their legacy while acknowledging the strategic importance of their land. It wasn't charity, but partnership, a recognition that their stubborn persistence had unintentionally safeguarded something of national significance. As the ceremonial portion concluded, the president spent several minutes in less formal conversation, expressing genuine interest in their agricultural practices and Sophie's scientific experimentation with water conservation techniques. What had been scheduled as a 30-minute visit extended to nearly an hour as the nation's chief executive found himself genuinely engaged with the innovative approaches this struggling farm family had developed out of necessity. "Your irrigation modifications are remarkably similar to projects our agricultural department has been funding at major research universities," he observed, examining Sophie's hand-drawn diagrams. "You developed these independently?" Sophie nodded, confidence growing as she explained the water-saving system she and Elena had pieced together from salvaged parts and theoretical knowledge. "We couldn't afford commercial systems, so we adapted. Mom says necessity makes the best engineer." The president laughed appreciatively. "I'd say she's right. Sometimes the most innovative solutions come from people who can't simply buy their way out of problems." As the visit drew to its conclusion, the president presented them with an unexpected token, a presidential challenge coin traditionally reserved for military personnel and distinguished visitors to the Oval Office. "A small reminder that your actions matter beyond this farm," he said, placing the weighty metal disc in Elena's palm. "When the history of American water security is written, the Martinez family will have an honored place in that story." The presidential entourage departed with the same orchestrated efficiency that had marked their arrival. Marine One lifting off in a swirl of dust that seemed fitting given the storm that had initiated this extraordinary chain of events. As the helicopters disappeared beyond the horizon, the media teams packed their equipment, advanced personnel collected their temporary installations, and the farm gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. By late afternoon, only Diana and a small security detail remained, preparing for their own departure once final arrangements were confirmed. Elena found her in the kitchen, coordinating with her team while simultaneously reviewing preliminary reports from the Justice Department regarding the water rights conspiracy. 7 arrests so far, Diana reported, looking up from her tablet, including 2 state water board officials and the CEO of Western Resource Partners, the shell company that purchased your bank. Elena absorbed this information, still processing the scale of corruption that had been functioning beneath the surface of their struggling agricultural community. Will it stick? These are powerful people with expensive lawyers. The Valencia documents provide compelling evidence, and two co-conspirators are already negotiating cooperation agreements, Diana replied with professional satisfaction. More importantly, the regulatory capture they'd established has been disrupted. The aquifer will now be properly documented and protected. She closed her tablet, expression softening slightly. A security team will remain in place for at least 2 weeks as a precaution, but the immediate threat has been neutralized. You and Sophie can return to normal life, albeit a new normal given today's developments. Elena glanced through the window where Sophie was already back in her work clothes, showing one of the remaining security agents her latest irrigation experiment. I'm not sure what normal looks like after all this. Yesterday we were facing foreclosure. Today, the president visited our farm and announced a national partnership program. Diana smiled, a genuine expression rarely seen during their ordeal. Life pivots on small decisions, doesn't it? You could have stayed inside during that dust storm. I would have died in my vehicle or been captured by the people pursuing me. The Valencia documents would have remained undiscovered. The aquifer would have been quietly controlled by private interests. Instead, you decided to help a stranger. The observation hung between them, a recognition of how ordinary moral choices sometimes created extraordinary consequences. Elena had never considered herself remarkable. She had simply been trying to survive, to preserve what mattered, to pass on values to her daughter that would outlast her own lifetime. What happens now? She asked, the question encompassing far more than immediate logistics. Officially, you'll be working with a specialized team from Agriculture and Interior to implement the partnership program the President announced. Your grant application has been approved with expanded funding for water conservation innovation. The foreclosure has been permanently blocked through federal intervention. Diana paused, choosing her next words carefully. Unofficially, your life has changed in ways that will take time to fully understand. You've become a symbol now, of rural resilience, of environmental stewardship, of ordinary heroism. That brings both opportunities and challenges. Elena absorbed this assessment, recognizing its accuracy without fully comprehending its implications. How did one adjust to such a dramatic reversal of fortune? How did a struggling single mother farmer process becoming, overnight, a nationally recognized figure connected to presidential policy initiatives? As though reading her thoughts, Diana added gently, just remember why all this happened. Not because you sought attention or importance, but because you remained true to your values, even when it was difficult. That's your anchor in whatever comes next. A government SUV pulled into the driveway, signaling Diana's imminent departure. She gathered her belongings, including the carefully folded work jacket Elena had lent her during the storm. Keep it, Elena said when Diana attempted to return it, a reminder that sometimes help comes disguised as something else. Diana accepted the gesture with uncharacteristic emotion. I've been in government service for 15 years, she said quietly. This case, this farm, your family, it's reminded me why I chose this path in the first place. As they walked outside to the waiting vehicle, Sophie joined them, solemn-faced as she prepared to say goodbye to the woman whose arrival had transformed their lives. Will you visit sometime? She asked directly, when you're not being chased by bad guys or bringing presidents to our farm. Diana laughed, the sound unexpectedly youthful from someone who had maintained such rigid professionalism throughout their ordeal. I'd like that. Someone needs to see how your irrigation innovations progress. The farewell was brief, but weighted with shared experience that had forged connections transcending their different worlds. As Diana's vehicle disappeared down the long driveway, Elena and Sophie stood together in the fading afternoon light, surveying their land with new eyes, seeing not just what it had always been, but what it had become through chance, choice, and courage. It's still our farm, Sophie said, echoing Elena's earlier private affirmation, just with a bigger story now. Elena nodded, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. And we're still Martinez women, just with a bigger responsibility. As twilight settled over the land that 5 generations of their family had cultivated, mother and daughter walked toward the house that had nearly been taken from them, now secure for the foreseeable future. The dust had settled, the storm had passed, but its effects would ripple through their lives and beyond for years to come. Sometimes, Elena reflected, the most significant transformations began with the simplest choices. A hand extended, in help during a storm, a refusal to abandon ancestral land despite mounting pressure, a daughter's courage in the face of danger. These ordinary decisions, strung together across generations, created a legacy more valuable than anything hidden. Beneath the soil, the farm would endure, the Martinez women would adapt, and somewhere in Washington, decisions would be made with their story in mind, perhaps helping other rural families facing their own storms on distant horizons. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.